Throughout recent history, there have been notable instances where individuals within the Republican Christian or conservative evangelical spheres have made comments that were perceived as celebrating or wishing for the death of others. Here are a few prominent examples. Public celebrations or reactions. Antonin Scalia's replacement, 2016. While not a celebration of death itself, the immediate pivot by many Republican Christian leaders to secure a conservative successor, within hours of Justice Scalia's passing, was viewed by critics as a pragmatically cold reaction to a tragedy. Conversely, when liberal figures have passed, some fringe religious commentators have framed the events as divine intervention to allow for more conservative court appointments. The death of Hugo Chavez, 2013, following the death of the Venezuelan leader, several conservative religious figures expressed a sense of divine justice. For example, Pat Robertson had previously called for the assassination of Chavez in 2005, citing it as a necessary step to stop the spread of his influence. Imprecatory prayer and wishes for death. In certain theological circles, imprecatory prayers, prayers based on psalms that call for God's judgment or destruction of enemies, have been used against political figures. Barack Obama, during his presidency, several pastors and activists used imprecatory prayers. In 2009, Pastor Steven Anderson of Arizona famously told his congregation he was praying for Obama to die and go to hell, citing the president's stance on abortion. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, before her death in 2020, some radical segments of the religious right openly called for divine removal, or used social media to suggest her passing would be a blessing for the pro-life movement. In the political and religious landscape of 2025 and early 2026, the use of imprecatory prayer, prayers calling for God's judgment or destruction, has remained a flashpoint. While many mainstream leaders condemn such rhetoric, specific instances have drawn national attention. The James Tallarico controversy, March 2026. In early 2026, a significant controversy erupted involving Brooks Pottiger, a spiritual advisor to high-ranking conservative figures. The incident, during an appearance on a podcast titled Reformation Red Pill, Pottiger and other guests discussed James Tallarico, a Texas Democratic state representative and U.S. Senate nominee. The comments, the speakers used imprecatory language, with one guest stating, "I pray that God kills Tallarico," and Pottiger agreeing, "We want him crucified with Christ." The clarification, following public backlash, Pottiger released a statement claiming his words were misinterpreted. He argued that he was praying for Tallarico's conversion, and that the old man, a biblical term for the sinful nature, would die, rather than praying for his physical death. Reactions to political assassinations, 2025. The year 2025 saw high-profile political violence that tested the rhetoric of religious and political groups. The death of Charlie Kirk, following the fatal shooting of conservative activist Charlie Kirk at a university event in 2025, the response within the Republican Christian community was largely one of mourning and calls for biblical justice. The divide. While mainstream leaders called for peace and civility, monitoring groups noted that fringe social media accounts and some radicalized online Christian nationalist circles used the event to call for divine vengeance against political enemies, framing the struggle in spiritual warfare terms that hinted at the necessity of the destruction of the wicked. Key trends in 2025-2026. Mainstreaming of imprecatory psalms. There has been a noted increase in the use of judgment psalms, like Psalm chapter 109 or 137, in political podcasts and sermons. These are often framed as praying for the defeat of evil, but critics argue they serve as a thin veil for wishing harm on specific political opponents. Theological justification. Leaders in the New Apostolic Reformation and similar movements often frame political opponents not just as people with different ideas, but as demonic strongholds that must be torn down, or removed, which many interpret as a wish for the